regardless of symptoms. Sometimes, and I'm guilty of this as well, we throw around the term therapeutic love in FAP in terms of creating that warm and embracing state. So it's just worth noting that if you don't have to use this term. If you're uncomfortable with this term, you're in good company. There's change in FAP. We're talking about responding and with contingent reinforcement to specific behavioral targets that occur close in time and proximity. That probably doesn't sound like what you wrote on the card at your last anniversary to a partner. So it is important to recognize that these are kind of different things, that while it requires you to be seen as a source of non-judgmental warmth, compassionate caring is going to look different. How we show caring, what it looks like, what we're comfortable with in the room is going to look different, and that's okay. It's not an excuse for unethical behavior. If via your experience with how clients respond to your physical features, to the common gender pairings in your clinic, and how those align with sexualities and presentation, you find that clients are responding to you in an overly romantic or sexualized way, then modifying the presentation of warmth in a different way could be one option. Or giving feedback, sometimes it's just always a one of the client to respond in an over-sexualized way. Criticisms have been published by Bill Follett, Amanda Munoz-Martinez, that the word love has a strong history. Its use as a training term may lead to confusion to you, lead to confusion to your clients. I once asked one of the founding people in the FAP world, do you ever use the word love with a client? And this person responded, not if I think they'd ever sue. So I don't know that I want that to be my rule of thumb. I very rarely, I can think of one client that I've used the word with, but that could be a story for later. It also doesn't fully capture the FAP practices of differential reinforcement and shaping and punishment.
Can I just ask something a bit trite, but just in terms of communication between therapist and client in between sessions?
Yeah.
So just for me, a lot of it will be obviously email or text sometimes, and the language you use on text or the way you text a friend.
Very different.
Yeah. And I find that the majority of my clients always leave kisses at the end of their texts. And I never respond. I never respond with this. But that for me kind of goes along that sometimes.
Yeah.
So it becomes more intimate and more kind of on a friend basis.
Yeah, and there are also huge generational differences in use and what emojis mean. And I think when we do that like between session communication, it can be really helpful to think as well about so what's your conceptualization of ones and twos with this client? Anytime you introduce communication between appointments, it's actually a really important tool just at the meta level of you're evoking behaviors of either over-reliance or boundary crossing or not. So it's a lovely opportunity to have that context set. But then what do you do with it? What are their how do you set the a lot of fear around me having upcoming travel and feeling sort of abandoned in a vulnerable time, but also not at risk of suicide, non-psychotic, not wanting to interfere with, maybe it was my wedding. And so we talked through but this is also someone who it was really a two for them to express a need in a relationship where they feared that the response might be no. Because it's so horrible that someone might have to say no, so you never ask something that could have been enough. And so on the one hand, I wanted to reinforce it, but I also was not going to be writing the emails back. So we talked through, and it wound up being kind of a rule because it was quite a long time client going forward as well, which is you can always write to me. You can write whatever to me. You could share a success. You could share a fear. And I'm going to trust you to, you're going to trust me to read it.
Yep.
I'm going to trust you to explicitly let me know if there's a crisis that you want a response to, or if this is sharing. Because if it's sharing, I'm going to reserve the right to, to read and,
Yeah.
and get back to whatever. And if it's something where there's a need, you're feeling self-endangered, whatever the case may be, that you're going to flag that for me in this way.
Okay.
So I know that this needs a careful read and a response. And that seemed to be a good place where, that client then went on to never write that much, but really liked the idea that, okay, it's not off limits, you could feel connected and think that, and hold the thought that I'm going to read it when I get it. And I've already told you it's not a bother to me. We'll talk about these things when I'm back. And, we have it clear that I'm not always going to respond. And you could modify those sorts of rules in any way. It could be, I know we're of a different generation, and I know that it feels warm and close, and I want to let you know that I value our relationship and I enjoy working with you, and I'm never going to end my text to you with a kissy face. That's, how is that for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question thinking about, so we have coaches here, and Andrew comes from a corporate environment, and what you said is really important about practice is differential reinforcement.
Yes.
So in a corporate environment, we're not talking therapeutic love, so what would that look like?
So in a corporate environment, it's really, I would say think of the manager you've met who creates the climate of warmth and acceptance and encouragement and actually follows through on passing along the opportunities for you to grow and develop yourself. Think that kind of nurturing mentor role. It was a big thing. My practice was in San Francisco, so I had clients from all the big tech giants, and many of them, Google, Facebook, they had elaborate mechanisms to have senior people across divisions who would be mentors, who would have lunch with them, who would talk with them about what they're doing. So I would think in the corporate coaching field, it would be how do you embody and hold space and reinforce in the way of the person who knows? Because I know from my own experience as a therapist, even if you're not in that field, after enough clients, you know the politics, you know how this works. How do you embody the warm presence of someone who knows and is encouraging and caring about where they're going and supportive in line with the norms of the corporate culture? And when I say in line with the norms, I just mean kissy faces and the emojis and stuff. Again, like I said, you don't have to use things like the word love to show a client, this is a space where I care deeply about your suffering and about your ability to be with it in a way that's going to allow your relationships to work. I think of clients where if disclosing that you've experienced sexual assault or mistreatment is something that feels like it's important because there have been difficult breaks in your marital relationship, you can hold space for that and walk around it. And that goes back to the idea that may not be something where it feels necessary or appropriate as the therapist to ask for any more details than that's between that couple. but you can hold space for and reinforce the importance that, as someone who cares about you, like I'm sure your spouse does, or like it sounds like your spouse does from past history you've given me, I feel like it would feel meaningful to have this information. So there may be moments like that that also bridge the corporate world of when I think of you as someone I would work with that I could rely on, this is the sort of vulnerability that feels necessary. This is what feels meaningful. Does that all fit? Or any other thoughts or questions?
Just in relation to therapies, many of the clients that I've worked with, when I ask them the question, what is it about me that makes you open to discuss these things that you haven't discussed with other people? It's because they've got this preconceived notion of what I am as a therapist, so that I'm some kind of intellectual, that I've gone through some a heap of training or an expert in whatever field it's going to be. And it's that detachment of humanism in a way that they kind of use as a justification for being able to open up some. And that notion of showing therapists love, showing care, reinforcing positively, almost was contrary to what they expected in a way. I was wondering if it was something you experienced, or if you address that misconception, or something you work on together, or how would you handle that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you can talk about it as a part of informed consent, that you would like to incorporate these elements of therapy where you're engaging in an authentic and vulnerable level, and it may involve self-disclosure. And it will eventually come up that clients like that still don't believe you. You're being paid for it. You have your years of Bene Gesserit training to like have no emotional responses to anything off-putting about anyone. And it'll have to come up again and again. And I think one way to undermine that is self-disclosure. One way to undermine that is, specifically if we're sharing about values, about judgments, about things we have difficulty with. I had a client who came in once where he was isolated and alone, and part of it was that he'd recently read the Bell Curve and had internalized a lot of horrible ideas about Black people and their intelligence, and was wanting to have conversations about this in his social circle in San Francisco during Trump's campaign, and this did not make him popular, or like anyone that was getting invited back to parties or called back, or and it was very clear, like about my own political beliefs, about my disagreements, about my particular disagreements and dislike of that book, and
so you shared your opinions.
Yeah. But I said, and I see that you're lonely, and I see that you're suffering, and knowing that I don't endorse these beliefs, we can talk about, we can work with the loneliness, the isolation. Maybe we could find some ways, as we talk about the mutual effect we have on one another, what it's like to, what it could be like to reconnect with other people. Then you fast forward, and I signed up homework of going to a Trump rally, and he realized that they were awful people, and then he did a round of apologizing to his friends, and everything worked out. But that was a one-off. But yeah, it does come up though. It's no matter how many times you say it to a client, clients will say at the end of the day, this is why it's such a great question of asking, how do you think I see you? How do you think I feel about you? Because it evokes a client response like, it's your job to love me, it's your job to care, it really depends on the workplace setting. Sometimes it's easy to point out, it's not like I get paid that much for this, or this is a private practice and I have a waiting list. If I didn't want to work with you, I wouldn't work with you.
Okay.
I have 5 clients. I could fire you if I didn't like you. That's evocative. What's it like to hear that I could fire you if I really didn't like you? So,
Have you ever used that?
I think once, I forget what brought it up. But I also, my own version of socialized medicine was charging employees from Google and Facebook outrageous fees, and then I had a homeless client who used to work in the mental health field before cascade of addiction and homelessness, and was aware of active FAP from a past training at a hospital they worked at, and reached out to me, and while still unhoused, and we worked out a sliding scale of, I think, he offered to pay $20 a session, and I said, can you continue to feed yourself and house yourself as much as you can? If you do that, well, no. Okay, well, what's a level you can? Okay, we can do it for, it was $5, and then he got employment and got housed, and then it was $15, and then it would, but that's also helpful because it's evocative to a client that there aren't really strings there. There's not, there's benefit to a client realizing that this is, or being exposed to the idea that this is a relationship we freely entered, and that it's a relationship we could freely leave, with some ethical qualifications to that statement, but still.
It's interesting that you were mentioning, I suppose, under the guise of disclosure, offering opinions on your more disposition towards something. So, because it kind of flies in the face of the training that I've had in previous professions, where you don't say your beliefs because it's leading, and like in teaching, for example, I would never say what my religious disposition is. I wouldn't say what my attitude towards sexuality was and things like that. I would present these what people believe. This is what it is, and I'd be open to listening to and discussing it. So, but that notion of sharing, a preconception, sharing a moral standpoint. What I'm interpreting is that there's got to be a function to you sharing it.
Yeah.
There's got to be a point to it. So if I'm saying this is what you believe, I don't agree with it, but I'm open to entertaining discussion in the room. How do you feel about that? Are you comfortable with someone disagreeing with you? That notion of almost nuanced debate to a degree, that we can disagree but we can still have a shared space and we can get along. So, am I interpreting it right? Or?
Yeah. Like in this case, I just spoke because it was very clear that this that these racialized beliefs were at the heart of the interpersonal disruptions.
Sure.
And I didn't know yet, like one hypothesis could be that they weren't willing to sit in a room with someone who might not enthusiastically agree. I don't know what I want to be paid to fake, certain types of responses. Then I don't feel like it would be helpful. So, but yeah, it all comes back to function. So you use the example of teaching, like when I teach psychology of gender, which is there are a number of very heated topics today. So I might want to model, just like I would with a client. Here are 2 bodies of literature in this area that express how people disagree. Maybe if it feels appropriate, I could share, here's an area that I tend to be more swayed by. But it's all about the function in the room, in that context, with the roles that we both have and what we're both doing. So within a lot of trainings and FAP circles, you often will just hear people talk about 1s and 2s. It's not that important to discriminate, but in the literature, often T1 or 2 is used to differentiate the therapist behaviors. And it's a little different because it's, we're not typically thinking in terms of the therapist's own growth or toward or away moves as much as we are with this client, with this specific formulation. Is something a 2, meaning it's unique to that therapist, or uniquely reinforcing from that therapist, that when I am in this way, it is a 2 for a client, for this client, or a T1, which is this something that punishes the client's growth? And this is something that we want to differentially assess and make sure we're aware of with every single person we work with. Our 1 o'clock could be the client who feels like it's a caring, aware notion that we pass them Kleenex if they're crying. Our 3 o'clock appointment might feel that it's a covert message that we want them to stop crying already because it's off-putting. So we're always wanting to identify that. And it does require that we be comfortable with noting what are the emotions that are hard for me to sit with, what are the emotions that are hardest for me to reflect to someone else, what are the emotions that I might covertly be trying to avoid or steer away from with my clients.
On that note, sorry,
Yeah.
I was thinking about if you're working with someone in grief who's grieving and it's very, very emotional, obviously the same kind of thing, I was trained years ago that, you show nothing, you give nothing away, and recently I had a client who I've been working with for a long time who had a husband with a terminal illness who passed away. So I'd kind of, within that relationship, I'd got to know, although I wasn't doing therapy with the husband, I'd got to know him, so I felt I lost myself, which, so, and I did well up, but there was a huge part of me was like, I can't do this is so unprofessional, and so there's still that kind of rule that you can't let go, that you've got to hold it together. I'm not suggesting that you sit there and sob with them, but it's that, I find it hard with the line, I guess.
And I guess the difficult reality is that there's no line to point to and say it's only here. It depends on the client.
Yeah.
The client, their history, your history together. I could certainly imagine clients where, I've had long-time clients where their spouse comes to pick them up periodically, or, they're coming back from a trip, that you have a sense of connection with them, where if you found that person were dying, like, of course you well up, of course there'd be some feeling around it. And it's also, and this is why we'll do more experiential exercises as the day goes on, and this is where it's important to get in touch with our own grief. Is grief something I can be with without being overwhelmed? Is grief something I can sit with where even if I well up, I'm comfortable staying in this role and holding space for my client and still remembering to think about what I want to reinforce or what I want to block based on their history of engaging in their own hard emotions. So it's there's never the clear point.
Okay.
And I'd say the most important thing would just be comfort enough with particularly like negative valence emotions and feeling them in the room with someone that you are able to continue to function.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, would it really be really bad? You'd be crying with our client?
I don't think it's so bad to cry with our clients. Yeah.
I cried with the client for the first time like a couple of weeks back, and it really works a lot to develop a therapeutic relationship. Like never before have I shown emotion like to a client, but I couldn't help it. It was like particularly harrowing recount from themselves, and it just hit me. But it worked in that instant. So all my preconceived, beliefs about I can't show it, it's going to be wrong, they're going to read into it. So in this instance, it really works. So, but I think that's where I struggle with FAP a little bit. It's my understanding of the fundamentals, basics, the concepts of CRB1s and T1s and things like that. Because I was looking at T1s and T2s of like, how did I feel? What does it say about me as opposed to what have I done that's had an effect on them? That's a pretty big mistake.
It's an important switch.
So now I've got a much clearer understanding.
Because it's a T2 if the crying reinforces the client's own vulnerability and willingness to be that deep with you,
Yeah.
right then in a moment. So one of the clients that makes up the composite client I described, who talks very clinically about his depression, was one that I worked with for years, who since adolescence had been frequently hospitalized, and from the beginning of our work together would talk around an experience of having having been rejected by a close friend they felt related to their depressive symptoms, but it was so dense with jargon and clinical language, and I barely even knew what was going on with this story. And so during one session, after we worked together for a time, and he was revisiting this, I just shared, like, I feel so disconnected from what happened, and would you be willing to tell me the whole story and to not use any clinical language at all, to not use any descriptors, to just tell me the story? And I think we needed to build the trust. This was at least many months into therapy, because it was hard for him through tears to like tell it in that way that he really had to feel it. But I was crying by the end too. It was so moving to hear what had happened. But then my response motivated him to share with some close friends that had heard the story, but only like the very clinical version, to share an authentic telling with them of what this thing was that he kept bringing up. And it was very moving with his friends as well, and it built a cycle of reinforcing that his relationships felt so much closer, and when he was willing to show what was really going on, to really be with the feeling. So, and I imagine I had that effect with your client as well. We'll see. Yeah.
So I'm presuming that we would find out if it was a T1 or T2, we're discussing impact on the client if it wasn't obvious. But let's say I was sort of trying to figure out like something I thought would be a T2, it was actually a T1 for the client, and I was trying to figure out how to make it a T2. How would I go about doing that?
I wonder if you could give me an example. Like, what's the thing you're wanting to make a T2? Because I guess I'm thinking, like my knee-jerk response would just be, don't try and make it a T2, just do something else.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it just won't work. Maybe if it's not clear, if it's all self-disclosure, it's not reinforcing to this client. But some types are. But these are like rare special gems of twos you're getting from the client, and you have something else in your repertoire that could be reinforcing, then do that instead. It's not worth trying to force it. And I mentioned disclosure a lot. I always used to tell my supervisees in my clinic that often the most powerful form of disclosure, self-disclosure we use with our clients, is nothing about content about ourselves. Even though I'm obviously sometimes a fan of that, it's authentically sharing what we're feeling about them in a moment. So that is sometimes the richest source of self-disclosure that we're doing to begin with. And but yeah, if something topographically just doesn't seem to work to reinforce, then it's probably not worth too much effort to try and make it work.
Can I ask another question about that? What if a T2 that you didn't want to do or feel comfortable?
Yeah.
For example, I had a client who wanted to continue working with me. I didn't really want to continue working with her.
Yeah.
So because I just didn't feel like the relationship was really working. I felt very disconnected with her. That's not something we could cross at all.
Yeah.
But for some reason she was feeling like it was working and she wanted to continue.
Yeah.
What would you do in that instant when it's actually working for her, but I just don't feel like doing that?
Ideally, at an earlier stage, there might be opportunities to share when you're feeling disconnected to explore the mismatch, that might be something really powerful for the client. Termination can be a rough time to broach that topic.
Oh, we did do that. It inevitably was an amicable termination, but I couldn't get over the sense that she wanted to continue because it was benefiting her. I didn't feel very comfortable with that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong way there. It goes back to comfort with your own authenticity and your willingness to, and your willingness to be with that interpersonal tension. What's it like for you to say, I don't feel a strong connection where another therapist couldn't be of value? Or does, I notice there's this mismatch that I feel like you seem more connected to me than I've felt in our relationship. Can we talk about this and see what it evokes, see what happens? Is this a historical one for this person, that they read a lot of affection and meaning into connections that aren't reciprocated or don't meet her needs? Is there a lot of persevering in relationships that aren't very rich or very deep? So all of those could be places I'd want to go.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
It's also really common. I'd have clients come in, speaking of like response styles our clients want that we don't want to give, that it's very common a client would come in and say, I just want someone I want someone who's going to call me out on my bullshit, really, really tell me how it is. That comes up so often. And of course, my first thought is you're obviously struggling with a lot of self-criticism, and that's not my job to feed that. I want to meet that with some self-compassion. And so, but I tell them that, and usually they're okay to explore that if this could work. But
I guess that's where the therapist courage comes up, to be able to
yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah, our clients, if our clients always got what they were asking for, that's often what they're already getting in their life. If that were all that worked. But this is part of that awareness, courage, love moniker. I mean, it does take some courage on our part to be willing to say, this thing you're asking for, it's not just that I'm not comfortable giving it to you, but I don't think this is actually what you need.